I was having coffee recently with a friend of mine. He runs this, seemingly successful brand selling custom mechanical keyboards.
Oh, a very competitive market.
Extremely. Yeah. And on paper, he's the picture of the modern capitalist success story. Self-made, high revenue, always hustling. But the reality, sitting across the table, was just completely different. He spent the entire hour just staring at his phone, his leg bouncing nervously, totally obsessed with this sudden, unexplained drop in his search visibility on Amazon.
The algorithm.
Exactly. He looked panic-stricken. He was muttering about how he needed to, and I quote, feed the algorithm or pay for more boost just to get back the visibility he had yesterday.
So he's not competing with other keyboard makers. He's competing with the platform's opacity.
That's it. It was such a striking contrast. Here's a man who owns his inventory, he owns his brand, yet he didn't sound like a businessman competing in a free market. He sounded like a tenant farmer, terrified that the landlord was about to evict him on a whim.
That's a powerful analogy.
He admitted it. Yeah. He said after the platform fees, the mandatory advertising costs just to stay visible, the logistics cuts, he was essentially acting as a vassal, paying this heavy tribute to a tech giant just for the privilege of existing.
And that's where the old language of capitalism starts to break down. He's not really chasing profit, is he?
He's not. He's paying rent in a digital fiefdom. And as I looked around that coffee shop, at everyone else just glued to their screens, scrolling and tapping, I realized we're all kind of doing the same thing. We're performing unpaid labor to build someone else's capital.
Yeah.
It perfectly sets the stage for this radical economic theory that argues capitalism didn't just break, it died. And it has been quietly replaced by a system we thought we left behind in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And that system has a name, Techno-Feudalism. It's a really striking term, isn't it? It immediately shifts the entire conversation about big tech from just talking about monopolies to grappling with monarchies and decentralized control.
Right.
So our mission today is to really execute a deep dive into this theory. We need to unpack the nature of this new power, define the mechanisms of value extraction that are, fundamentally different from traditional capitalism.
Because the most important part, if you misdiagnose the illness, you prescribe the wrong medicine.
Exactly. And we'll analyze the global stakes, especially for labor and finance in developing economies, as this system centralizes wealth. And crucially, we have to explore the real-world responses happening right now, from antitrust crackdowns in the EU to the creation of technological alternatives designed to build the collective digital commons. We really need to understand not just what happened to capitalism, but what we can build in its place.
And it's absolutely essentially we start with that core theoretical shift. Because if we keep using the language of capitalism to describe what platforms like Amazon or Google or Meta are doing, we keep missing the point.
We're using the wrong map.
We're using the wrong map entirely. This is about a fundamental change in the relationship between owners and workers, producers and consumers. We are dealing with a new ruling class, the Cloudalists, and a new form of capital altogether. Understanding their extraction mechanisms is, it's paramount.
Okay, so let's unpack that core concept then. Command capital.
Yeah.
If traditional capitalism was driven by, say, industrial capital factories, machines, and then financial capital loans, investments, the power of these digital giants seems to stem from something else entirely. We used to rely on human agents, Mad Men-style advertisers, to create desire. What happens when that job is handed over to algorithms?
The shift it's profound because the algorithm stops being merely a tool and it starts becoming an agent. It's an entity with, substantial power to monitor and react to the outcomes of its own actions.
So it's not just following orders.
Not at all. In the age of Don Draper, advertisers would try to convince us to buy a specific car by crafting a perfect narrative, an emotional story. Today, the job of instilling desires, of shaping our habits, of presenting choices, that's been transferred to algorithmic agents residing in the cloud. Think Alexa, Siri, the recommendation engine on YouTube.
And most people, I think, view these agents, whether it's a smart speaker or a feed algorithm, as servants. We command them to do things for us. Turn off the lights, show me a new video, what's the weather? But this theory suggests the relationship is actually the other way around.
It's completely deceptive. These agents are just the front end of these vast, interconnected AI cloud networks, and they're being trained by billions of interactions every minute.
Right.
They don't just observe what we explicitly ask for, they observe how we respond to their output, they learn our preferences, our habits, our vulnerabilities, and crucially, they learn how to predict and then guide our choices.
And that predictive ability, that's where the power comes from.
That's where the command comes from. They have the power, effectively, to command our choices. They nudge us towards certain products, certain articles, certain behaviors, often without us consciously realizing the influence that's being exerted on us.
So the algorithm isn't just selling us a single product, it's selling us on a continuous, self-optimizing relationship with the platform itself. And the scariest part, as the theory suggests, is the feedback loop that just accelerates this control.
It's an infinite regress, a truly dialectical process. We, the users, we train the algorithm through all of our activity, every click, every pause. The algorithm then becomes smarter and better at training us by offering increasingly addictive or convenient or, perfectly tailored choices. This encourages us to produce even more data, which in turn helps the algorithm learn even faster.
So we're just caught in this loop.
We are. The net result is that we are constantly training the system to better serve the interests of its owners. And this resulting wealth, this power derived from the ability to algorithmically command and nudge global human behavior. That is what we call command capital.
It's fundamentally different from owning a factory or owning stock then.
Completely. It's owning the very mechanism of global behavioral direction.
Okay, so if that's the capital, then the owners of that mechanism are the new ruling class.
Yeah.
The Cloudalists. How do they generate value and profit compared to a traditional capitalist? Because traditional capitalism was focused on maximizing profit from competition and labor exploitation, but Cloudalism seems focused on maximizing something else: rent and unpaid service.
That is the core distinction. It's a different logic. Traditional capitalists generate profit by selling goods or services at a markup in a competitive market, or by extracting surplus value from paid labor. Cloudalists have two entirely new, structurally guaranteed methods of value extraction that are based on their ownership of that command capital.
Let's start with the first one then. The relationship between the Cloudalists and traditional businesses. Your friend with the keyboards. You call them the new vassal class.
Exactly. Mechanism 1. Rent extraction from vassal capitalists. Cloudalists extract huge systemic rents from conventional corporations that still manufacture physical goods or offer traditional services.
Right, my friend. He owns a successful brand, but he must pay tribute to Amazon or Google to even reach his customers.
That's it. The Cloudalist owns the command capital that makes the consumer want the product in the first place, through ads and recommendations. But they also own the marketplace, the infrastructure, and often the logistics where the transaction must occur.
It's a total double capture. The platform creates the desire, and then it demands a toll for fulfilling that desire.
Precisely. It's as if the fictional Sterling Cooper of the 1960s didn't just design the perfect ad for Coca-Cola. It's as if they also acquired all the grocery stores, every single vending machine, every convenience counter. And then they forced Coca-Cola to pay a percentage of every sale, plus mandatory fees for prime shelf space, which is just search visibility, just for the privilege of selling their own product. The traditional capitalist, the manufacturer, he becomes a vassal, perpetually dependent and forced to pay an escalating tribute or rent for access to the market.
And the cost of this rent is just staggering. I mean, it must cut into the margins of every traditional business trying to sell anything online. But the second power you mentioned is even more radical because it doesn't involve money changing hands at all. It's the exploitation of the user directly.
This is mechanism 2, direct extraction of unpaid serf labor. The same algorithms that command consumption also surreptitiously command users to produce new command capital for the owners, entirely for free. This is the very definition of digital serfdom.
Now, we think of ourselves as consumers, right? Or just users,
Yeah.
not as workers when we're online. So where is this actual labor being provided?
It's everywhere. Every single photograph you post on Instagram, every tweet you write, every review you offer on Amazon.
Just moving around town with Google Maps on.
Exactly. Simply driving around with your phone on, contributing real-time congestion and location data to Google Maps, that is all necessary, productive labor. This activity generates and refines the command capital itself. It improves the AI models, it trains the content motivation systems, and it provides the raw material, the data, for all future algorithmic innovation.
And the key difference from old school industrial labor is the wage.
The wage is zero. In industrial labor, profit extraction requires paying a wage that is lower than the value the worker creates. Here, the labor is unpaid, it's voluntary, and it's often performed enthusiastically.
That's an incredibly powerful mechanism for power concentration. And when you look at the global corporate landscape, you can really see the result of these two mechanisms at play.
Oh, the consolidation of power is undeniable. Just consider the scale. 7 of the world's top 8 companies by market capitalization use these platform-based business models.
And these models are just inherently monopolistic, aren't they? There are a few reinforcing factors.
Yeah. 3, primarily. First, you have the network effects. The platform becomes exponentially more valuable the more users it has, which creates a natural winner-take-all environment.
If all your friends are on one platform, there's no point in being on another.
Exactly. Second, data control. More users generate more data, which allows the dominant platform to train superior algorithms. This provides an almost insurmountable competitive advantage that smaller firms simply cannot acquire.
And the third factor, that's the one that traps both the users and the vassal businesses into the system.
High switching costs and lock-in effects. Once a user or a business integrates their operations, all their documents, their customer relationship management, their financial tools into a platform's integrated service ecosystem, the costs and the sheer pain of moving to a competitor become prohibitive.
So these systemic advantages just ensure that all the wealth and all the command capital generated by billions of serfs and thousands of vassals flows upward to the few Cloudalists.
Yes. And this concentration isn't just economic, it's intensely geographical, which carries major geopolitical implications.
What do you mean by that?
The digital economy is just alarmingly imbalanced. The United States and China, they account for a shocking 90% of the market capitalization value of the world's 70 largest digital platforms.
90%. That's huge.
It is. And this concentration extends to the foundational technologies themselves. They also claim 75% of all patents related to crucial technologies like blockchain. And critically, they account for at least 75% of the centralized cloud computing market. The hyperscalers like Amazon Web Services, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, they dominate this infrastructure globally.
So if the cloud is the new territory, the new land,
right,
those two powers control the vast majority of it. And every other nation, even highly developed ones, becomes dependent on their infrastructure.
Correct. This reliance on a few concentrated cloud providers creates these enormous bottlenecks that have severe implications for digital sovereignty and future innovation.
Yes.
Well, if the next wave of economic growth is driven by AI, and AI fundamentally relies on massive centralized computing power, any nation or company outside the US and China that doesn't own that core infrastructure is inherently operating as a vassal. They're subject to the whims, the pricing, and the political decisions of the hyperscalers. The concentration isn't just about market share, it's about control over the fundamental utilities of the future.
So moving from that theoretical structure to the actual human cost, this concentration has immense implications when we look at global labor and finance. We started with the concept of digital serfdom, and I feel like nowhere is this more acutely felt than in the gig economy. The platforms promise liberation through flexibility, but the reality often looks a lot more like intensely managed exploitation, just masked by technology.
The gig economy perfectly embodies the mechanism of cloud serfdom. It's the theory in practice. Digital platforms use command capital to connect supply the workers and demand the clients globally.
And on the surface, it seems decentralized and efficient.
It does. But the platform owner, the Cloudalist, they often retain precise control over the work process. They set the pricing, they manage the rating systems, they distribute the tasks algorithmically, all while denying the worker the legal classification, the security, and the benefits of a traditional employee. The worker is managed by the algorithm, but carries all the risk.
And what does the data actually reveal about the conditions of these crowd workers? We hear a lot of anecdotes, but the raw statistics about how their time is actually spent are, well, they're particularly revealing.
The International Labor Organization did a major survey that really quantified the working life on 5 of these big English-speaking crowd-working platforms. And the results, they illuminate this structured exploitation.
Okay.
Workers average about 24.5 hours per week logged onto the platforms, available and performing tasks. But here's the crucial finding. Only 18.6 of those hours were actually paid work.
So wait, we're looking at a difference of almost 6 hours a week. That's about 25% of their total time on the platform that is spent doing necessary but completely unpaid labor.
Precisely. That 6 hours translates to roughly 20 minutes of unpaid activity for every single paid hour of work. And this time isn't leisure, it's critical work required to maintain access to the platform and secure future jobs.
What kind of work is that?
It's constantly searching and bidding for tasks, taking unpaid qualification tests to prove your eligibility to the algorithm, reading complex client instructions, researching a client's history to mitigate the risk of fraud, writing detailed reviews and responses. All of this activity refines the platform's command capital, but it's performed by the digital serf for free.
That seems like a completely unsustainable model built on constant hustle and instability. And how does that promise of flexibility actually play out for these workers in reality?
Well, the flexibility is severely constrained by the platform's demands and the global nature of the work. The survey highlighted massive underemployment. A staggering 88% of respondents said they wanted to perform more crowd work.
Which indicates this isn't a sustainable primary income source for most people.
Not at all. Furthermore, the flexibility often means working profoundly asocial hours. 36% of them regularly work 7 days a week, which just blurs the lines between work and life. And 43% frequently work during the night, often due to coordinating with global time zones where the demand is, or because of domestic care responsibilities.
That's a really harsh reality, particularly for women who are often trying to balance childcare or other family responsibilities.
Indeed. For the women in the survey, 13% explicitly cited working from home because of care responsibilities. It demonstrates that crowd work is often used not as a choice for entrepreneurial freedom, but as a necessary means of earning income when traditional structured employment is inaccessible. It forces them to work late evenings and nights just to manage the balance.
And this precarity, combined with a lack of any collective bargaining power, means what for the worker?
It means that if the work is easily substitutable, and on a global platform it always is, the worker loses all pricing power. They suffer a critical loss of free agency. The platform dictates the terms, it aggregates this massive global supply of labor, and ensures the price remains as low as possible, capturing all the overall value that's generated.
Okay, so if cloud serfdom highlights the direct exploitation of the individual worker, we also need to examine how these same global boundary-agnostic mechanisms allow Cloudalists to extract revenue, and often avoid taxation, from the very nations where those serfs live. It's really exploitation on a national scale.
It absolutely is. Data has become a critical economic resource. It's viewed variously as raw material or infrastructure or intellectual property. The issue is that the architecture of the digital economy ensures that the value created by this resource is captured by the few global platforms that control the collection and monetization process, regardless of where that data originated.
And the digital advertising market is probably the clearest, simplest example of this capture, right?
That's right. The scale is just immense. Google and Facebook together earned $135 billion in internet advertising revenue back in 2017. That's 65% of the global total. Their dominance ensures they capture the revenue generated by user activity across the entire globe, making them the default toll collectors of the digital highway.
And they leverage this reliance on intangible assets, data, algorithms, intellectual property, and their borderless digital operations to engage in some pretty sophisticated tax optimization practices which severely limit the tax base in developing economies.
This is where the term vassal economics extends beyond the individual manufacturer to the entire nation state. Because digital platforms lack the physical presence needed to trigger traditional tax obligations in many markets, they can easily shift profits derived from user activity to low-tax jurisdictions.
How do they do that practically?
They use mechanisms like transfer pricing. They'll charge their subsidiaries in high-tax countries these exorbitant fees for intangible assets or services provided by a parent company located in a low-tax haven like Ireland or Bermuda.
And the proof is in the payment ratios. The vast majority of the tax they pay ends up back in their home country, the U.S., even though the majority of their revenue is earned internationally.
Precisely. You just have to look at Facebook in 2017. It earned 56% of its revenue outside the U.S., but paid a staggering 92% of its taxes back to the U.S.
Wow.
Similarly, 88% of Google's taxes were paid to the U.S. This means that developing countries and emerging markets, which collectively represent billions of users generating immense value through their data and interactions, have a severely limited ability to tax the profits created within their own borders.
So they're vibrant digital markets, but they cannot capture the economic value created by their own citizens.
Exactly. It's a structural flaw where value creation has been completely detached from value capture.
So what are the emerging policy options being considered to address this global imbalance and potentially reclaim some of that value?
The consensus is growing that we have to move beyond viewing data as simple private property or just a free, infinite resource. We need new frameworks for economic rights over data. Policy options generally fall into two categories: individual and collective.
Okay, what's the individual approach?
On the individual side, proposals suggest remunerating individuals for the data they share, perhaps through personal data markets or maybe through nonprofit data trusts that are managed on behalf of the user.
And what about the collective approach? That seems more aligned with tackling the national scale of this value extraction.
That brings us to collective data ownership mechanisms, things like establishing digital data funds or defining a new digital data commons. The principle here is that data generated by citizens, businesses, and organizations within a national jurisdiction is, collectively, a major economic resource.
And so its value should be retained and shared more equitably.
Exactly. It could potentially fund public services or infrastructure rather than being centralized by foreign Cloudalists. The whole debate now centers on who holds the economic rights to the aggregate intelligence generated by millions of users.
This immense concentration of command capital, it just demands a response. And historically, governments would reach for antitrust law to curb monopolistic power. But as we've discussed, traditional competition policy seems, well, hopelessly outdated in the face of Cloudalism.
It is fundamentally mismatched. Traditional antitrust focused almost exclusively on consumer harm that was defined by higher prices.
Right. If a monopoly raises the price of milk, that's clear consumer harm.
Exactly. But digital platforms often offer their main services, search, email, social networking, for free. They capture value not by raising prices, but by extracting data, diminishing consumer choice, exploiting privacy, and extracting all that unpaid labor we talked about.
So a competition regulator trying to apply the old price test will often find no evidence of harm.
Correct, even as the platform exerts total control over the entire market structure.
So regulators need entirely new criteria to define and measure abuse of market power in the digital sphere. What are these new metrics?
We need structural criteria that recognize the unique dynamics of these digital markets. This would include assessing things like consumer privacy harm, where users are essentially forced to surrender private data as a non-negotiable condition of using the service. It also means analyzing the market structure and the switching costs, recognizing that it's the difficulty users face in moving away from a dominant ecosystem that really defines the barrier to entry for competitors, and critically, scrutinizing the impact of large platforms acquiring innovative small firms, the so-called killer acquisitions.
You mean acquisitions like Facebook buying Instagram or WhatsApp or Microsoft buying LinkedIn? These moves often eliminate a nascent, potentially competitive threat before it ever really matures.
That's it, exactly. These acquisitions are not about efficiency. They're about maintaining command capital dominance by acquiring rival data streams and preventing the erosion of their network effects. Traditional antitrust often struggled to block these because the target company wasn't yet profitable enough to be considered a real market competitor.
But the structural harm is immense.
The stifling of future competition and innovation.
It's huge.
I remember the German law update in 2017 being a bit of a breakthrough here, allowing them to look beyond just the price.
Yes, the German competition law update was crucial. It broke from the dogma that a market must have a price component. It formally recognized that the provision of free digital services, such as a private social network like Facebook, constituted a defined market. They called it the private social network market.
And that allowed the Federal Cartel Office to intervene
Against abusive practices without needing to prove monopoly pricing. It provided a legal template for addressing market concentration dynamics where data extraction, rather than price gouging, is the primary goal. So beyond just updating antitrust, there's a strong argument that certain hyperdominant platforms should be treated not just as businesses, but as essential infrastructure, kind of like public utilities.
Yes. When a service becomes essential for participation in modern society, when users feel they cannot reasonably function without it, be it a professional network, a communication channel, or an e-commerce gateway, it acquires characteristics that are very much akin to a utility.
And that opens the door to a completely different style of regulation.
It does. It opens the door to utility-style regulation, which focuses less on competition and more on guaranteed access and fairness for everyone.
So what are the main proposals for implementing this utility model?
There are three critical regulatory proposals that come up. The first is common carriage. This would require dominant platforms to be open and provide fair, non-discriminatory access to all businesses.
So if a platform is deemed a universal social network, for example,
then exclusion from that basic utility should not be decided arbitrarily by a single private firm based on opaque terms of service. It should be governed by democratically accountable rules, much like a telephone company can't just refuse to connect you to the network.
The second proposal tackles the clear conflict of interest in being both the marketplace and a seller on that marketplace.
That is the principle of non-discrimination. This addresses practices where platforms privilege their own services. For instance, an e-commerce giant like Amazon should not be allowed to place its own private label products like Amazon Basics in privileged positions in its search results.
Or use the data it gathers from third-party sellers to develop its own competing products.
Exactly. It also means prohibiting algorithms from charging different prices for the same service to different customers without transparency. The platform must be a neutral infrastructure layer, not a conflicted competitor.
And finally, we have to regulate the actual engines of command capital, the algorithms themselves.
Algorithmic accountability is paramount. When command capital is wielded by these black box AI systems that make sensitive, life-altering decisions in fields like finance, employment screening, criminal risk assessment, or housing applications, those algorithms must be auditable by regulators and third parties.
And the goal there is transparency.
The goal is to ensure they are transparent in their function, free of embedded bias, and do not violate fundamental rights simply because they operate beyond human comprehension. This level of oversight is just non-negotiable when private computational power controls access to societal opportunities.
It really sounds like the European Union has taken the lead globally in constructing this regulatory castle wall, so to speak, against the power of the Cloudalists.
Oh, they absolutely have. The EU's proactive approach is driven both by consumer protection concerns and by this dawning realization that they must reclaim their digital sovereignty from US and Chinese giants.
And we see this in major legislation.
We do. The General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which established global standards for data privacy. The Digital Markets Act, DMA, which is aimed specifically at preventing these gatekeepers from self-preferencing and mandating interoperability. And the Digital Services Act, DSA, which focuses on platform accountability for content moderation, harmful content, and transparency.
So these acts together are trying to restructure the digital market.
They're trying to enforce critical safeguards, yes.
And this movement for digital sovereignty, it's also being spurred by that infrastructure bottleneck we discussed earlier, the hyper-concentration in centralized cloud computing.
The fact that AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud control 75% of the market. It's not just a commercial issue, it's a strategic national vulnerability. Any advanced AI development, any government digital transformation relies entirely on the capacity and the pricing of these few centralized, foreign-owned hyperscalers.
Which creates a huge geopolitical risk.
It makes every nation reliant on them a digital vassal. This realization is fueling a global resurgence of industrial policy, particularly in the EU, aimed at developing domestic strategic investments in cloud infrastructure and open-source alternatives.
The goal being to ensure that the foundational tools of their economies and societies are not dictated by external private interests.
Precisely. If the core infrastructure is private and centralized, it functions as a perfect mechanism for rent extraction. Reclaiming sovereignty means ensuring critical infrastructure can either be domestically controlled or, better yet, moved into a realm of public control. Which brings us to the counter-strategy, actually building the digital commons.
Right. So if regulation is the defensive strategy, setting boundaries and enforcing fairness, then the creation of alternatives is the proactive strategy. It's about building a fundamentally different kind of digital ecosystem, the digital commons.
The digital commons represents systems that are developed, maintained, and governed by groups through peer collaboration, rather than through market pricing or subordination to private owners. And this model is perfectly suited to digital resources because of their foundational nature. They are non-rivalrous goods.
Could you explain non-rivalrous goods?
Sure. In traditional economics, if I consume a physical apple, you cannot consume that same apple. It's rivalrous. But if I use a piece of software or I access a library of open source code, my usage doesn't diminish your ability to use it at the same time.
In fact, it might even increase the value.
Some even call them anti-rival goods because their value often increases the more people use and contribute to them. This suggests that the digital realm is ideally suited for models based on sharing and collective governance rather than proprietary control and exclusion.
But history is full of examples of the tragedy of the commons, where shared resources are overexploited because no one owns the incentive to maintain them.
That classic economic model doesn't fully apply here. The challenge for the digital commons is often described as the tragedy of the digital commons, but it's slightly different. It's not overexploitation. It's a failure of maintenance and long-term sustainability.
What do you mean?
Many people benefit without contributing back to the necessary, often mundane task of upkeep and security, especially for foundational open source software that basically everything else relies on. Donors and governments. They always prefer funding exciting new innovation and rapid implementation over steady, long-term maintenance budgets.
So addressing that funding gap is key to making the commons viable.
It's everything.
So let's look at how nations and communities are actually trying to build this public digital infrastructure, or DPI, to bypass the Cloudalists. India's model is often cited as the most comprehensive globally.
India's DPI model, known collectively as India Stack, is a profound effort to create open, national-scale digital infrastructure. It's a set of open application programming interfaces, APIs, and digital layers that are considered government-owned, non-competing goods.
And this foundational layer includes critical services, right?
Yes, things like Aadhaar, which is a universal biometric identity system, UPI, a massive real-time payment infrastructure, and DigiLocker, a secure document storage system.
So what makes that approach so powerful?
By establishing these public, interoperable layers, India Stack fosters localized innovation and competition on top of the public foundation. It prevents any single private company from becoming the monopolistic gatekeeper of identity or finance. The infrastructure is a low-cost, publicly controlled utility layer that forces the private sector to compete on service innovation, not on data or network lock-in.
That powerful template.
A very powerful template for fostering localized innovation while preserving digital sovereignty.
And we see other countries implementing specific foundational elements too, like Estonia's X-Road.
Estonia's X-Road is another prime example. It is an open-source government data exchange system that connects all major public and private databases in the country. It provides a highly secure, decentralized, and transparent system for government agencies and citizens to exchange data.
And the key is that the data stays where it is.
Exactly. The data remains stored where it was created, but the X-Road provides the secure common pipeline for sharing it. This reduces the reliance on any single proprietary database or centralized cloud service.
That addresses national infrastructure. What about more niche, but still essential infrastructure for global development, like in health data?
The Digital Health Information System, DHIS2, is a brilliant case study of a global digital commons. It's a free, web-based, open-source platform for health data management, and it's used in over 80 low- and middle-income countries. It covers approximately 30% of the world's population.
And it fills a critical gap where commercial providers just wouldn't invest.
Exactly, particularly in remote or last-mile healthcare needs.
How does its governance protect it from being co-opted or exploited by commercial interests, or even by donor meddling?
Its governance structure is its strength. It's managed by the University of Oslo's HISP Center within a global network of partners. This academic, non-commercial management ensures it remains free of commercial interests or specific government meddling, which is vital for building trust, especially when you're handling sensitive global health data.
But it must face that same funding challenge.
It does. This model relies entirely on donor and research funding, and it struggles with that maintenance gap we discussed. Donors often prefer funding new implementations rather than the core stability of the system.
And the power of the commons is even seen at the cutting edge of research, like in artificial intelligence, where open source libraries are fighting the centralized power of the tech giants.
Scikit-learn is a cornerstone example here. It's an open source library that is indispensable for machine learning and AI research globally. While AI development requires vast computing power, the underlying tools and libraries can remain in the commons. Scikit-learn has a mixed funding model, including public research grants, corporate sponsorship, and community donations.
So how do they ensure that corporate sponsorship doesn't translate into commercial control? That seems like a major risk.
Through very clear governance protocols, the community of volunteer developers drives the decision-making process for the project's technical direction. While they accept private funds, there are strict limits and guidelines to prevent funders from exerting undue influence over core development.
So it ensures the tool remains a public alternative.
It preserves the public intellectual property generated by global research, keeping it out of the hands of just one or two Cloudalists.
And beyond global development and AI, Germany has actually institutionalized collaboration between the public sector and open source communities to build software for the state itself.
Yes, Germany's establishment of the Center for Digital Sovereignty, Zendies, is a key structural response. Zendies acts as this crucial bridge between government needs and the open source developer communities. Their flagship achievement is Open Code, a platform that hosts over 1,400 code repositories for public sector use.
And what's the practical output of Zendi's and open code? What do they actually build?
Their mission is to create guardrails and facilitate rules-based, transparent collaboration on digital commons projects. They ensure high standards for cybersecurity and compliance with government requirements. This directly supports initiatives like Open Desk, which is a collaborative workspace suite designed for German public administrations.
So by investing public funds into an open source platform,
They're transforming proprietary systems, which would normally require license fees paid to a private company, into public digital infrastructure, maximizing transparency and their long-term control.
finally, we have to address the loss of the public square, the collapse of civic dialogue into these private platforms managed by opaque algorithms.
That brings us to initiatives like Decidem, which was developed by the city of Barcelona. Decidem is a publicly owned platform created to provide an alternative space for online public speech, debate, and democratic participation.
So the goal is to create digital public spaces.
Exactly. Spaces that adhere to democratic and collective forms of governance, moving away from private corporations that manage content based on opaque algorithmic priorities focused on engagement and extraction. This is an attempt to create new online civic institutions, akin to how governments established public service broadcasters like the BBC in the 20th century, but adapted for the digital age.
So on one side of the world, we have this Techno-Feudalism thesis defining the Western path math, private cloudalists extracting value and rent. But the sources point out a radical counter-thesis, particularly visible in China, which has a different model entirely.
This comparison is crucial because it shows that moving beyond capitalism doesn't necessarily mean moving towards the liberal ideal of the digital commons. While some analysis cites China's advanced everything apps like WeChat as the pinnacle of techno-feudal efficiency, a robust counter-analysis argues that China operates under techno-socialism or market socialism, which fundamentally suppresses the power of the Cloudalists that we see in the West.
That seems counterintuitive, given the massive tech companies that exist in China. How does the system suppress cloudalist power?
The Chinese model stresses three defining features: platform protectionism, government control, and semi-nationalization. While companies like Tencent, which runs WeChat, and Alibaba are immensely powerful, their relationship with the state fundamentally limits their ability to extract the purely private rent that defines Western techno-feudalism.
And how does that everything app concept, epitomized by WeChat, combining social media, communications, finance, how does that fit into this model?
WeChat's success is built upon state involvement and extreme centralization, but it is deeply integrated into the political project of nation building. The state enforces platform protectionism, ensuring that Western competitors cannot enter the market to challenge their domestic champions.
And WeChat itself functions differently.
It does. It functions less like a private for-profit entity and more like a necessary state utility.
So the command capital still exists, but the beneficiary of the command changes.
That's it, exactly. The command capital is wielded, but it is subjected to state direction. WeChat actively collaborates with authorities in developing public services. It's used for digital ID cards, city administration functions, local governance, and critically, it hosts Communist Party committees within its own offices.
So the state involvement and centralization suppress the power of the cloudalists just enough to prevent the total realization of the feudal vision of purely private rent extraction.
Correct. Instead, it creates a state-directed market socialism that is focused on maintaining national digital borders and ensuring government control over the flow of data and command capital, rather than allowing private interests to dictate societal command.
So whether the system is techno-feudalism or techno-socialism, the shift is away from competitive market dynamics towards centralized control and dependency. The only difference is who controls the center.
That is the ultimate synthesis, I think. The digital economy is fundamentally shifting the value equation away from the competitive market logic of profit and toward a structure defined by rent extraction and dependency. Whether that structure is dictated by centralized private cloudalists who extract tribute globally, or by state-directed techno-socialism that centralizes control for national strategic goals, the foundational battle remains the same: the ownership and governance of the command capital and the digital infrastructure that generates it.
Which means the defining battle of our era is really over infrastructure. Whether the basic digital tools and platforms that society and commerce rely on will be owned privately by a concentrated few who extract rent, or whether they will be secured as a collective, publicly governed commons for the benefit of the many. The policy choices being made right now, the push for algorithmic accountability, the investment in DPI, the structural changes mandated by acts like the DMA, all of these are determining the fate of the post-capitalist economy.
The transition from capitalism to this new system requires us to fundamentally rethink the idea of data ownership, or even data privacy. We have to recognize that the data generated by citizens, businesses, and organizations within a jurisdiction is a major economic resource, perhaps the most critical resource of the 21st century. And the policies we choose now will determine if that resource benefits the many through shared public infrastructure and robust regulation, or if it remains centralized among the few Cloudalists, locking the rest of the world into a state of permanent digital dependency.